The thing that grabbed me about Diputus Hari and Bangkit Besok wasn't the system or even the glow-up. It was that first feeling of, oh, I know this guy. You watch Ben standing there with his cheap helmet in his hand, sweat sticking his delivery jacket to his back, and you can almost smell the asphalt and exhaust around him. The show takes this very internet core premise, broken-hearted loser gets a cheat code from the universe, and actually slows down enough, at least at the start, to let the heartbreak sting. This is Jonota News, by the way, and if you like long, slightly too honest drama breakdowns, you can hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. We are going to sit with this show for a bit, because it deserves more than a quick system drama go brrr, mem and a shrug. So, the rough idea, if you are coming in blind, Ben is a broke courier who gets dumped by his girlfriend because she wants stability, money, comfort, everything he cannot give her. She leaves him for a rich guy, and that betrayal basically flips a switch in his world. Out of that rock-bottom moment, some mysterious system wakes up and starts giving him rewards every time he helps a woman who's in trouble. From there, we watch him climb from living hand-to-mouth into becoming a legit entrepreneur, with all the messy choices and temptations that come with that. I'm going to talk pretty freely about early and mid-story stuff, but I'll keep the really crucial late-game specifics and final moves soft and vague, so if you're spoiler-sensitive, you can still decide if this ride is worth it. What I like is that the drama doesn't start as a shiny fantasy. It starts sticky and cramped. The camera is in love with narrow alleys, the backs of ojek drivers' helmets, rain that never seems to fully stop. Ben's world is cheap fluorescent lighting and perpetual low battery on his phone. You feel how small his life is. And because the director commits to that from the beginning, when the system finally shows up, it doesn't feel like the show changed genre. It feels like something absurd cracked open inside an already unfair world. Which, honestly, is kind of how heartbreak feels when you're broke, surreal and stupid and way too big for your tiny rented room. Let's talk about that breakup sequence, because it sets the emotional tone for everything that follows. There's this moment where Ben has just finished a delivery, he's counting coins in his hand, literally counting, and his girlfriend texts him, "Kita harus ngomong." Classic. They meet in this cafe that's just a little too fancy for him. You can see it in how he keeps adjusting his jacket, like he wants to fold himself smaller. She's already dressed like she belongs there, soft blouse, subtle gold bracelet, hair done. When she tells him she can't keep doing the struggling couple thing, the camera doesn't cut to melodramatic close-ups right away. It stays a bit wider, lets them both sit in the awkwardness. And then the rich guy walks in, not cartoonishly arrogant, just composed. Confident. The way Ben's body language collapses, it's brutal. He doesn't shout. He doesn't flip the table. His eyes just go a little empty while he forces a smile. And that quiet humiliation? That's the wound the whole show is built on. The system, the money, the revenge, all of it sprouts from that one tiny, horrible coffee date. What's clever here is that the show doesn't line up and tell you, here is the villain, boo, hiss. It lets you feel the injustice first. Only later does it start complicating that picture. And if you are wondering whether this is just going to be revenge porn with a sci-fi skin, that breakup is your first hint that they're aiming a bit higher than that. After that scene, Ben spirals, but it's not dramatic TV spiraling with booze bottles smashing against walls. It's the very normal kind, missing a turn on a delivery because you are replaying a conversation in your head, almost getting hit by a car because you are looking at her Instagram one more time, ignoring your mom's call because you don't want to hear the "I told you so" tone in her voice, even if she never says the words. The actor playing Ben leans hard into these micro moments of numbness. There's one little beat where he's sitting on the edge of his bed in this cramped room, helmet still on, delivery app still open on the cracked phone screen, and he just stops. You can hear traffic outside, someone's karaoke echoing faintly from another house, but he's like a frozen tab on your browser. That's when the system finally shows up. The first activation of the system is played almost like a horror gag, and it works better than it has any right to. His room is half dark, only lit by this tiny desk lamp and the sickly blue of his phone. He's scrolling mindlessly, eyes glazed, and then suddenly the screen glitches in a way that's just off enough to make you blink. Static. A line of text flickers. The sound design goes muffled, like when you dive underwater. Ben thinks his phone is broken, because of course he does. He shakes it, slaps it, swears at it. And then this system interface, all sleek and futuristic, overlays his boring delivery app and pings him with a message about his first mission. Help a woman who's currently in danger. Reward, basic starter pack. The way he laughs, this exhausted, bitter little sound, is perfect. You can see him thinking, I just got dumped, and even my hallucinations are clickbait. But then, outside, you hear a shout. A woman's voice. He hesitates. And that's the hook, this ridiculous, game-like UI, and then a very real, very normal scream in the alley. Which one are you going to believe? Here's where the show starts walking a tightrope between gimmick and metaphor. The system's core rule is simple: help women in trouble, get rewarded with money, items, or skills. It could easily have turned into a cheap fantasy where the universe literally pays you for being a nice guy. And to be fair, in the first couple of missions, it kind of plays like that. He steps in, does the right thing, and suddenly his evolet is fatter, or his broken motor magically gets upgraded. But the writers same time keep undercutting the neatness of it. Helping isn't convenient. It makes him late on deliveries. It gets him yelled at by customers, by his boss. Sometimes the women don't even thank him, they're suspicious or embarrassed. The system might give him a reward, but the world doesn't. The show has fun with the absurdity of the system, too. The UI voice, somewhere between a deadpan GPS and a smug gamer, will announce things like hidden side quest completed. Reward, rainproof jacket. It's silly, but it works because Ben treats it as silly. He argues with it. He calls it names. There's a moment where he tries to game it by opening doors for every woman he sees, and the system roasts him for low-effort assistance. That little vein of humor keeps the premise from feeling preachy or icky. And yet, under the jokes, there's this low-level unease: why only women? Who made this system? Is it just cosmic benevolence, or is he being nudged into a very specific savior role? The show doesn't answer right away, but the question lingers in the back of your mind. And this is the part that surprised me. The emotional core isn't really, Ben gets powers and proves his ex wrong. The emotional core is, what kind of man do you become when every good deed has a price tag attached? The direction leans into that problem visually. Whenever he completes a mission and the system pops up with congratulations, the world around him dulls a bit. Sound fades, colors wash out. We linger on his face as he watches numbers go up on a digital screen. It's the high of a new notification, multiplied by survival stakes. But then the shot cuts back to the woman he just helped, still shaken on the curb, still in her life, with her own ongoing problems. That contrast hits like a quiet slap. Sure, he helped, but he also profited. Is that okay? Necessary? Gross? The show lets you sit with that discomfort. The parade of women he helps early on is a mixed bag, and I mean that in a good way. We get the more classic damsel in distress beats, late at night, creepy guy following someone down an alley, but we also get mundane struggles, a street vendor being harassed by an official, a single mom trying to juggle kids and work when something goes wrong with her bike, a student short on money who's clearly about to make a shady choice. Not all the missions are life or death. Some are about dignity. Some are about time. And the more variety we see, the more the system stops feeling like a weird magical Uber for women in danger and starts feeling like a spotlight pointed at all the invisible labor and vulnerability that women carry around every day. The guest actresses really help sell this. Even in one episode appearances, they get little moments of specificity. A vendor who keeps her anger call tight in her jaw instead of screaming, a college girl who cracks a joke at her own expense just to diffuse a tense situation, a mom who switches from panic to stern in 2 seconds because her kid is watching and she refuses to scare them. Those tiny choices make it harder to view them as NPCs in Ben's game, even though the system literally frames them that way. And that tension, between game logic and human reality, is where the show is most interesting. Now, I know a lot of people are going to see the synopsis and immediately go, "Oh, so the ex is the big bad, she's the shallow gold digger, got it." And I'll be honest, the marketing kind of leans into that, and in the first stretch, the show lets you sit in that anger. It's cathartic. You are meant to hate her a little when she pops up on social media with her new, wealthier boyfriend, posting soft launch pictures from rooftop restaurants while Ben is stuck in the rain. But as we get further in, I actually found myself weirdly protective of her. No, seriously. I'm going to be that person who says, she's not the villain of this story. Or at least, she's not the most dangerous one. The framing of her choice is brutal but recognizably real. She's tired of splitting bills and pretending it's fine, tired of lying to her parents about how well they're doing, tired of worrying every time Ben drives off into the night. When the rich guy comes along, he doesn't sweep in with a sugar daddy speech. He talks about stability, plans, actual numbers. The drama makes sure you understand she didn't wake up one day and decide to be evil, she gave up on waiting for potential. And that hurts because we've all been in or around relationships like that. Does it excuse the way she breaks things off? No. She's still cruel in that cafe scene, more than she needs to be. But the show drops enough context that if you are paying attention, you can't just stuff her into the shallow X box and call it a day. Watching her with the rich boyfriend is its own little study in class performance. He moves through high-end spaces like he was born there. She's still learning the choreography, what to order, how loudly to laugh, when to reach for the check and when to let it slide. The actress plays this constant microtension under her surface, like she's wearing clothes half a size too tight socially. And that's where the betrayal cuts both ways. Yes, she traded Ben in. But she also traded in the version of herself that was allowed to be messy, loud, broke, and still loved. Later, when their paths cross again as Ben is leveling up, that pain seeps out in sideways comments, in looks, never in a clean, "I regret everything" speech. Honestly, that complexity did more for me than any overblown redemption arc would have. Meanwhile, the visual language of the show is quietly doing a lot of work. Early on, Ben's world is shot with this handheld, slightly shaky camera style. The palette is a lot of grays, washed-out blues, neon signs that hum but never quite illuminate the scene fully. When the system starts paying out and his life upgrades piece by piece, the visuals follow. Streets look wider. Restaurants are lit warmer. Even the rain looks different, less miserable, more cinematic. There's a great little recurring motif where we see him from behind on his bike, framed against the city. In the beginning, he's dwarfed by trucks, billboards, overpasses. Later, as he starts his own business and hires people, the camera places him higher up, looking down over warehouse spaces, office floors. It's not subtle, but it's effective. The editing rhythm taps into that shift, too. Those first episodes breathe. Shots hold. We actually watch him wait for orders, scroll his phone, drink cheap coffee. Once the system kicks in and the missions start chaining together, everything speeds up. We get these almost music video-like montages of him rushing from one quest to another, the UI popping up like a game HUD. Notifications dinging, maps overlaying on screen. It's fun, and it sells the addictiveness of his new life. But in between, the editor drops in quite little reaction shots, a woman he helped watching him drive away, his mom looking at his suddenly new shoes with this mix of pride and suspicion, that keep reminding you, he's not the only person in this story whose stakes are rising. The soundtrack deserves a nod here. It leans heavily on contemporary pop and mellow R&B for the more romantic and aspirational moments, then slips into almost lo-fi beats for his late-night grind sequences. There's this one track that becomes sort of Ben's theme, a simple guitar loop with a SYNTH line over it, that plays when he's caught between temptation and conscience. It's not flashy, but after a while, your body recognizes it before your brain does. Whenever you hear it, you know he's about to make a choice that matters. On the flip side, the system moments are scored with this mix of glitchy electronic sounds and almost angelic chords, which is a smart combo. Is this thing a blessing or a glitch in the matrix? The music never fully tells you. Where Diputus Hari, Bangkit Besok really starts digging under its own premises when it treats the system as more than a plot device and starts treating it as a metaphor for transactional kindness. Ben begins as someone who would probably help people anyway, even without a reward. He's soft-hearted to a fault. But once he realizes there's a pattern, you can see his brain rewiring. The show gives us a few scenes where he hesitates, not because he doesn't want to help, but because he's checking, will the system count this? Will there be a notification? That hesitation is darkly funny and a bit uncomfortable. How much of our own morality is like that, even without a glowing UI? How many good deeds do we secretly log in our heads, waiting for karma to pay out? Another layer is the way the system's rules draw a border around who counts. Only women. Only in specific kinds of trouble. Only within a certain radius sometimes. So what happens when he sees a guy in danger? Or a kid? Or a woman whose problem doesn't fit any neat category? There's a mid-series situation where he has to decide between following a clear mission and stepping outside the rules for someone who doesn't qualify, and it's one of the best uses of the concept. The system punishes him, lightly at first, dock a reward here, downgrade an item there, but the real punishment is watching him realize that his new life has strings attached. The universe's generosity comes with fine print. The rags to riches angle is, obviously, a big part of the appeal here. Watching him go from living day to day to making actual moves as a businessman scratches that very basic itch we all have for stories where hard work and heart eventually pay off. The writing doesn't magically erase structural inequality, but it definitely compresses time and luck in his favor. That could be annoying if they treated it like a "here's the blueprint for success" sermon. Thankfully, they don't. The business stuff is sketched in broad strokes. He starts small, leverages the connections he's made through his missions, reinvests his rewards instead of blowing them on flexing. The important part isn't the exact industry or profit margins, it's watching him learn to think beyond just surviving the day. There's a nice through line with how he uses money once he has it. Early on, the first big cash reward he gets goes to the most relatable possible thing, clearing his debts. You feel that relief with him. Later, when bigger sums show up, the choices get less obvious. Buy a nicer bike or a better helmet. Save for a business license or help his mom repair the roof. Lend money to someone he helped earlier who's now in a bind. These aren't presented as test questions with correct answers, they're just messy, human decisions, and the show gives them space. You see the guilt when he splurges. You see the pride when he finally treats himself after ignoring his own needs for so long. The side characters who orbit Ben as he climbs are one of the show's quiet strengths. There's the fellow courier who starts off as friendly competition, then slides into something like a little brother role as Ben's life changes. There's his long-suffering boss, more cowardly than cruel, who represents all the people trapped in the same system but without an actual system to help them. There's his mom, of course, grounded and practical, who doesn't fully understand what's happening but recognizes the danger of sudden wealth all too well. Each of them reacts to Ben's rise differently: admiration, jealousy, suspicion, confusion. Those reactions keep the story from drifting off into pure fantasy. No matter how many glowing UI windows pop up, he still has to answer to his real relationships. The actor playing Ben anchors all of this with a performance that's surprisingly subtle for such a high-concept premise. He's got this naturally open face that makes you root for him even when he's being kind of an idiot. Watch his eyes in any scene where the system dangles a particularly juicy reward in front of him. There's excitement, sure, but there's also fear. Fear of losing himself, fear of losing the fragile moral high ground he's clinging to. He does a lot with tiny, almost throwaway gestures, shrugging one shoulder when he lies, clenching his jaw just before he says yes to something he knows he should refuse. It makes Ben feel less like a vessel for the audience's wish fulfillment and more like an actual guy you might bump into at a gas station. Pacing-wise, the early stretch is where the show is both most addictive and most at risk of feeling repetitive. We get a rhythm: heartbreak, first mission, reward, tiny life upgrade, repeat. If you are into that loop, like watching someone level up in a game, it's a blast. But there were a couple of episodes where I caught myself anticipating the beat rather than being surprised by it. What helps is that they start weaving longer arcs into that mission of the week structure. A woman he helps early on reappears later with a new problem, a small kindness pays off in an unexpected business opportunity, a mistake he makes on one mission comes back to bite him just as he's closing in on a huge deal. The editing starts braiding these threads together, so it feels less like Episode 7, New Woman, New Quest, and more like a slowly growing web of cause and effect. I have to admit something here. This show hit me in a very particular way because I, like a lot of people, have been both Ben and the ex at different times of my life. I've been the one grinding, hoping love would be patient enough to wait for my situation to improve. I've also been the one who looked at a relationship, did the math on our future, and realized the numbers just didn't work, and that scared me more than heartbreak. So when the drama sits in that messy space, where ambition, fear, pride, and love are all tangled, I felt called out. In a good way. There's a quiet scene where Ben is counting his earnings at the end of a long day, mom half asleep in front of a soap opera, and he whispers to himself, "I'll show her." It's not noble. It's petty. But it's honest. That mixture of wanting to do good and wanting to win? That's the engine under this whole thing. Not everything the show tries lands perfectly, though. The system's exposition, especially early on, can get a bit clunky. There are a handful of scenes where Ben is basically standing in a room arguing with a voice that only he can hear, and you can feel the writers dumping rule explanations through that dialogue. Like, if you help in X way, you'll get Y points, and if you chain missions you get a combo bonus, that kind of talk. It's useful if you like clear mechanics, but occasionally it undercuts the emotional stakes of the scene. There's a moment where a woman is clearly terrified, something serious is happening, and the system is chiming in with almost tutorial-like guidance. I get what they were going for, tension between real fear and game logic, but the balance is off sometimes. This brings us to the show's most sensitive and probably most controversial element, the fact that the system only rewards Ben when he helps women. On the surface, it sounds like a setup for cringe, nice guy behavior, and in worse hands, it absolutely would have been. The drama sidesteps some of the worst pitfalls by never letting him treat the women as romantic prospects by default. In fact, most of the women he helps never become love interests. They're clients, neighbors, strangers, friends, mentors. The focus is on solidarity more than seduction. But even with that, there's an undercurrent of unease. Is he doing this because it's right, or because it pays? Is the universe basically gamifying allyship for men? One of the more powerful missions avoids easy answers to those questions. Ben crosses paths with a woman stuck in a toxic, borderline abusive situation, not super graphically portrayed, but you feel the control in the way her partner talks over her, in how she keeps apologizing for taking up space. The system flags it as a mission, but the solution isn't beat the bad guy up or swoop in and rescue her. Instead, most of his help is logistical and emotional, connecting her with resources, giving her a safe ride when she finally decides to leave, just quietly being a witness who takes her seriously. The reward he gets afterward feels almost offensive in its neatness, and the show leans into that discomfort. He's standing there, notification glowing on his phone, while she's starting the hardest chapter of her life with a single suitcase. It's one of those scenes where the premise and the reality scrape against each other. What I appreciated is that the writing never turns her into a plot coupon. She shows up again, changed but not magically healed, and her presence forces Ben to confront what help even means. Is it a one-time intervention? Is it ongoing support? Where is the line between caretaker and controller? The drama doesn't spell it out for us, no big speech with underlined themes, but you can see those questions reshaping how Ben engages with future missions. He stops just seeing problems to solve and starts seeing lives he's temporarily intersecting with. If you've watched a lot of Chinese or Korean system stories, web novels, manhwa, dramas, you'll recognize some of the DNA here. The mission pop-ups, the skill trees, the satisfying sense of constant progression. But Diputus Hari, Bangkit Besok, stands out in how rooted it feels in a specific socio-economic context. The problems he's solving are very grounded: a market stall threatened by sudden rent hikes, a factory employee being quietly pushed out, a girl who can't attend a job interview because she has no safe way to get there. Instead of dungeon raids and magic beasts, his monsters are corrupt officials, casual sexism, debt, and time. That groundedness keeps the fantasy from floating away. Stylistically, the show has fun with the game aesthetic without letting it dominate. You'll see experience bars, mission timers, little ranking boards pop up, but they're layered over very familiar Indonesian urban landscapes, narrow alleys, food stalls, rainy bus stops. There's this neat recurring gag where the system will flash some grandiose title like Guardian of the Night over Ben's head after a mission, but then the next shot is him unclogging a drain or helping someone carry groceries. It's a small joke, but it hammers home that heroism, in this world, is rarely glamorous. The editing during some of the mission sequences can be really sharp. There's one early stretch where he has to juggle multiple crises at once: a woman stranded on the side of the road, another about to get scammed online, and a delivery he'll be fired for missing. The show crosscuts between all three, interspersed with system notifications and a ticking timer. It feels almost like watching someone speedrun a game they've only just learned, fumbling, improvising, but somehow keeping all the plates spinning. The tension isn't, will he die? It's, who will he let down? And that, honestly, is more relatable. As Ben starts actually succeeding, saving some money, investing in equipment, thinking about scaling up, you can feel the whole tone of the show tilt. The color palette brightens, the soundtrack leans more into bouncy tracks, and even the way people talk to him changes. Before, he was invisible, just another courier in a sea of helmets. Now, people remember his name. The women he's helped recommend him. He becomes this quiet urban legend: call Ben, he'll fix it. The system takes note, too. The missions escalate. The rewards get more tempting. The idea of him as just one struggling guy slowly morphs into him as a local power. And right when that transformation is starting to feel like a straight upward line, that's when the show begins threading his ex back into the narrative in a more direct, confrontational way, not just as a ghost on his screen. She doesn't come knocking on his door with some dramatic apology. It's much smaller, pettier, more realistic than that. He bumps into her at a place where he would have never dreamed of being allowed before, and you can see her recalibrate when she realizes he's not the guy she left in that cafe. The rich boyfriend clocks it, too. You feel the triangle solder back together, but now the power dynamics are flipped and warped. The rich guy, for his part, isn't just an empty suit. The writing gives him tiny cracks, a flare of insecurity when Ben's name keeps coming up, a flash of contempt when people treat hard work like something noble instead of something you escape from as fast as possible. Watching him watch Ben climb is fascinating, because that's when the class resentment cuts both ways. It's not just poor versus rich anymore, it's old money versus new. And somewhere in that tension, Ben has to decide what kind of successful man he wants to be, the kind who closes the door behind him, or the kind who keeps it open, even if that means inviting more chaos into his carefully system-optimized life. What I love is that the show doesn't hand him a noble answer. It doesn't turn him into this perfectly selfless community hero just because he started from nothing. There's a specific boardroom scene, one of my favorites, actually, where this all crystallizes. Ben's in a meeting with a potential investor, the kind of guy who smiles with his teeth but not his eyes, and the offer on the table is simple: expand fast, cut corners, automate away the human touch that made Ben's service special. The investor actually says, "Why are you bothering with these high-risk clients? Focus on people who can pay more, complain less." And you see Ben freeze, because that logic makes business sense. It's also directly opposed to the way the system dragged him up in the first place, by forcing him to look at the people most in need, not the ones most profitable. The way the actor plays that moment is painfully human. He doesn't stand up and deliver a big, righteous speech. He stalls. He jokes. He asks for time to think, even though the system UI is already pulsing faintly in the corner of his vision with some vague warning about mission trajectory deviation. You watch him trying to juggle 3 different voices in his head: the poor boy terrified of losing this chance, the system-trained helper who feels gross ignoring vulnerable people, and the angry ex-boyfriend who still wants to flex on everyone who doubted him. It's messy, but it's the kind of mess success actually looks like when you didn't grow up expecting to have any power at all. And after that, the script starts poking harder at what help looks like at scale. One-on-one, it's easy to frame Ben as a good guy. He shows up, he listens, he does something tangible. But when his business grows, he's suddenly on the other side of the equation. He has employees, delivery partners, office staff. And they have emergencies, too. Female couriers who get harassed on the job. Admin workers who can't find childcare. And the system starts flagging some of those situations as missions, which is an incredible little twist because it turns his own workplace into a testing ground for his principles. Is he going to treat his people as real humans with complicated lives, or just as assets in his spreadsheet? There is a chilling little sequence where he fails that test. One of his female riders gets into a dangerous situation while on a route, nothing graphically violent, but scary enough, and Ben, juggling a huge contract and under pressure from that toothy investor, chooses to prioritize damage control over compassion. You see him snap into boss mode, get statements, protect the brand, don't admit fault. It's not that he doesn't care. He does. You can see it tearing him up. But for the first time, he thinks like someone who has more to lose than his own skin. And the system punishes him for it, not in some thunderbolt way, but through a slow, creeping erosion of his stats. Fewer missions offered. Lower quality rewards. The UI literally starts dimming. What makes that arc work isn't just the mechanics. It's the way the actress playing the injured courier looks at him afterward. There's no dramatic slap. No screaming accusation. Just this flat, disappointed stare. She knows he's a better man than the one who sat in that meeting and worried more about brand hashtags than about her bruises. The show lingers on that look longer than on any flashy system graphic. And that's when you realize the series is making a quiet argument: the real system that matters isn't the magical one in his phone, it's the network of people whose trust he's either building or breaking, day after day. This is also where the women he's helped earlier in the series start flowing back into the narrative in ways that feel surprisingly organic. A student he once gave a ride to ends up as a temp in his office. That street vendor he protected from harassment is now catering his events. The single mom he helped with a busted bike becomes one of his most reliable riders. They're not just Easter eggs. Their presence is a constant reminder that his empire is literally built on the foundation of those missions. So when he starts making choices that hurt them, even indirectly, there's this immediate sense of betrayal, like he's cheating on the very ideals that got him here. One of the sharpest choices the show makes is not turning any of those women into the one true love who fixes him. A lesser drama would have done that. Instead, each of them connects with a different part of him. The student challenges his ideas about ambition. She's not content just being grateful for his help, she wants a seat at the table. The single mom calls him out on his savior complex. There's this fantastic scene where she literally tells him, laughing but with an edge, "I needed a hand, not a hero." And the street vendor becomes this sort of no-nonsense aunt figure, unafraid to tell him when he's being stupid, success or no success. These relationships form a constellation around him. And the system almost fades into the background in those scenes, which is honestly where the show shines. And yeah, the elephant in the room here is the ex. Because you are probably wondering, does she ever regret her decision? Does she crawl back when she sees him doing well? The answer is more complicated and, in my opinion, way more interesting than a simple, yes, she regrets it, revenge fantasy. This is where the show might lose some people, actually. because it refuses to give a clean emotional resolution between them for a long time. They orbit each other in shared spaces, a charity event, a client meeting, a mutual friend's celebration. Every time, they're slightly different people, and every time, that old cafe scene plays like a ghost between them. There's a moment, I need to talk about this one in detail because it's one of those mini master strokes where acting, direction, and writing all sync up. They end up stuck together in an elevator during a blackout. Total cliché setup, sure, but the way it's handled is so raw it made my stomach drop a little. The emergency light is this sickly yellow, throwing weird shadows on their faces. You can hear the distant engine hum of a generator starting somewhere in the building. At first, they do the small talk dance. How are you? Busy? Congrats on the company. You look different. It's tilted, formal. Then the elevator jolts slightly, and she instinctively reaches for the wall. He sees the flash of fear in her eyes. She's always been a little claustrophobic, something only he, and maybe the rich boyfriend, would know. The UI flickers to life on his phone screen, picking up her increased heart rate or whatever, pinging him as a distressed female, potential mission. And for a split second, you watch something ugly cross his face. The thought, oh, so now the universe wants me to help her, is right there. He could lean into it, turn this into some smug performance of magnanimity. Instead, he does something much more honest and, to me, more devastating. He switches his screen off, shoves the phone in his pocket, sits down on the elevator floor, and says, almost casually, hey, remember that time we got stuck on the bus because it broke down on the bridge? You were more scared then. It's such a simple line, but it's loaded. He's tugging them back to a memory where they were equals, both broke, both afraid, both clinging to each other. She hesitates, and then you see it land. Her shoulders drop a little. She sits down opposite him. They don't talk about the breakup. They don't talk about money. They talk about that night on the bridge, about the vendor who climbed on board to try to sell snacks in the dark, about the old lady who kept praying out loud, about how they joked that if the bus fell, at least they'd go together. What the drama does in that cramped little metal box is something pretty rare for this kind of premise. It reminds you that before all the class war and cosmic systems and mutual resentment, there were two scared, hopeful kids in love. And then it doesn't wrap that up. No big confessions. No, I'm sorry I left speech. The lights come back on. The elevator shudders to life. They stand up, dust off their clothes, and step out into their separate lives. But the next time they see each other, there's a hairline crack in the armor they've both built. That matters later, especially when the rich boyfriend's own insecurities start driving him to more overtly antagonistic moves. Because yes, the show does eventually dial up the X tries to drag him down energy, but again, in ways that feel grounded rather than soap operatic. It's not like she's hiring thugs or something. Her sabotage is more insidious, gossip dropped in the right ear, a casually cruel comment at a networking event, a moment of complicity when she could have defended him and chooses not to. And then there are the times she actually does defend him, almost accidentally, because her residual affection slips out before her pride can stomp it down. That contradiction keeps her from becoming a one-note hater. What's really clever is how the show forces Ben to look at his own capacity for pettiness, too. He's not just the victim of her social sabotage. There's a powerful sequence where he has the chance to ruin her boyfriend's big project with one phone call, a project that, if successful, would basically lock Ben out of a huge slice of the market. The system, interestingly, stays silent about this one. No mission. No guidance. It's like it's saying, this one's on you, man. He sits there, phone in hand, thumb hovering. You can smell the sweat. You can hear the clock ticking on the wall behind him. He even dials the number and hangs up twice. It's such a simple visual, but it crystallizes everything. Does he want to win because he's built something strong, or because he's dragged someone else lower? I want to talk a bit about the way the show frames masculinity, because that's one of the quiet themes humming under the surface. We meet Ben at his most disempowered, financially, socially, romantically. His sense of manhood is tied up in his ability to provide, to protect, to not be just a courier. The system feeds into that fantasy by literally telling him, "You are a protector of women, your worth is in how well you can shield them." On the face of it, that sounds chivalrous. But as the missions stack up, you start to see the cracks in that ideal. There are women who don't want a protector, they want a partner. There are women who resent the implication that they need saving. There are women who accept his help but push back when he steps into paternalistic territory. There's a fantastic, quietly funny scene with one of the more outspoken women he helps, a lawyer, sharp and sarcastic, where she basically demands that he stop hovering after the mission is technically completed. He keeps checking in, offering extra favors, and she finally goes, "Are you helping me or applying for a job as my shadow?" He's taken aback. The system dings positively, apparently boundary respecting is counted as successful aid, and he just glares at his phone like, "You could have told me that earlier." It's a small moment, but it's emblematic of how the drama is willing to make fun of, and interrogate, the very fantasies it's selling. On the flip side, we also see positive models of masculinity in supporting characters, men who show care without expecting rewards. Men who step back to let women lead, men who are vulnerable without the rug of their dignity being yanked out for laughs. Ben's fellow courier friend, for example, has an arc that could have easily been jealous bro sabotages hero. Instead, he goes through a far more internal journey, feeling left behind, feeling insecure, then swallowing his pride and asking Ben for mentorship. There's an aching little scene where he says, "Do you think the universe forgot about me?" And for once, Ben can't hide behind "work harder" platitudes, because he knows, literally, that the universe has an actual system and it did in fact choose him and not this guy. That's one of the few times where Ben almost tells someone about the system. The words are right there. You can see him wanting to offload the burden and the weird guilt of being chosen. But he stops. They both sit in this awkward silence for a beat, then he says something frustratingly vague like, "You are not forgotten." Sometimes help comes from places we don't see. It's a cheesy line, but the actor plays it with enough strain that you buy that Ben is trying to comfort his friend without lying too outrageously. Moments like that make the high concept feel heavy in a good way. This isn't just a cheat code, it's a secret that isolates him. The cinematography leans into that isolation, especially as his life gets more glamorous. Early on, crowded frames, busy sidewalks, cramped rooms. Later, we see him increasingly framed alone in big spaces, standing in a sleek office at night with floor-to-ceiling windows, sitting by himself at the head of a long conference table, walking through a warehouse while his employees work in the background but never fully share the frame with him. It's a visual shorthand for something a lot of self-made stories gloss over, the loneliness that comes with upward mobility, especially when no one around you has the same frame of reference anymore. Sound design plays its part, too. One detail I adored, the notification sound of the system subtly changes over time. At first, it's this bright, almost playful chime that cuts through the ambient city noise. As the missions get riskier and the moral stakes higher, they tweak the sound, deeper, echoing a little longer, faintly dissonant. It's such a nerdy production choice, but it works on your subconscious. By the later stretch, that sound doesn't trigger excitement in you as a viewer, it triggers a little jolt of dread. You start thinking, okay, what's going to get complicated now? That mirrored my own relationship with the premise. At the beginning, I was curious about the rewards, later, I was more worried about the costs. Speaking of costs, there's an angle this show goes for that might rub some people the wrong way, and I kind of loved it. It doesn't pretend that every woman he helps is good. Some of them are, frankly, selfish. Some are ungrateful. Some use what he gives them to do things he doesn't approve of. And the system, cold and indifferent, still dings him with a completed mission and hands over the reward. There's a particularly striking episode centered on a young influencer who's about to be publicly humiliated by a leaked video. Ben helps her navigate the crisis, partly out of empathy, partly out of being nudged by the system, but afterward, she leans hard into monetizing the sympathy, spinning the whole thing into a brand boost. He's horrified. We are, too, a little. He wanted to rescue a victim, instead, he feels like he's just plugged into another pipeline of performative suffering. The system doesn't care. Mission accomplished. Seeing his face as he watches her follower count spike in real time, you understand what the show is trying to say. You don't get to control what people do with the help you give them. Not in real life, and not even with cosmic tech on your side. That's a hard pill to swallow for someone whose identity is fusing with the idea of being the guy who helps. This leads into one of the more unexpected turns in the story, where Ben goes through a phase of almost resenting the system. He tries to turn it off. He ignores missions. For a while, he succeeds. Life hums along at a comfortable, if slightly hollow, pitch. The business sustains itself. The ex and her boyfriend become more distant figures, busy with their own problems. The world doesn't end just because he's not playing hero. And that's the scary part for him, realizing he's not actually as indispensable as the interface has made him feel. It's a mini existential crisis played not in tears and breakdowns, but in empty nights and him scrolling through old mission logs like nostalgic Instagram stories. But of course, stories like this don't let the hero retire at mid-season. The universe, or whatever is behind the system, has more in store. A massive, city-wide scale crisis hits, not a natural disaster or anything too spectacle-heavy, but something like a cascading series of infrastructure failures that disproportionately affects the most vulnerable neighborhoods. The women he's helped are suddenly in simultaneous danger, not one by one but all at once, a mom stuck at work while her kids are home in a blackout, the lawyer trapped in a courthouse lockdown, the vendor facing looters in the chaos. The UI goes wild. Multiple missions stack up. Timers flash. The editing in this stretch is some of the tightest in the whole drama. We are cutting between Ben's face as he stares at this overwhelming list, the city going dark, people we've come to care about scrambling. The sound mix pulls in snippets of their voices, overlapping, panicked, layered over the deepening hum of the system's alert tone. He can't possibly be everywhere at once, the whole fantasy of the lone male savior crashes into logistical reality. And that's when he finally makes the leap the show has been nudging him toward. He stops trying to do it all himself. Instead of personally rushing out on his bike, he picks up the phone, many phones, actually. He calls the people he's hired, the women he's helped, the allies he's earned. He decentralizes the hero role. He turns his network into the system. Practically, it looks like sending his riders to ferry kids to safe houses, rerouting his delivery fleet to transport medical supplies instead of food orders, turning his company warehouse into a temporary shelter. Emotionally, it feels like relinquishing a crown. The UI, interestingly, starts assigning missions not just to him but to authorized agents, and you see the little mission complete animations popping up next to names that aren't his. It's such a satisfying payoff to all the groundwork about community and interdependence. If you were expecting a giant boss fight or some final, main villain, confrontation at this point, you might be thrown. The show resists making any one person the big bad. Not the ex, not the rich boyfriend, not even the slimy investor. The real antagonist is a web of systemic issues, inequality, precarity, gendered vulnerability. That sounds lofty and preachy when I say it out loud, but the series grounds it in specific faces and problems, so it never floats into TED Talk territory. In fact, one of my favorite choices, which I know some people online hated, is that one of the most cathartic downfall moments happens almost off-screen. We hear about a corrupt official finally getting exposed through a chain of events Ben unintentionally set in motion episodes ago, but we don't see the arrest, don't watch a big takedown set piece. We just see the impact, a market where vendors suddenly have fairer rates, a permit that finally goes through, a neighborhood that breathes easier. It's a quiet victory, but an earned one. Let me swerve into a bit of a contrarian lane here, because there's something I like that I know is not going to be universally popular, the show's refusal to give an easy romantic resolution for a long, long time. A lot of system dramas editorialize the hero's love life as part of his reward: get rich, get powers, get the girl who once rejected you, or a better one who never will. Diputus Hari, Bangkit Besok, teases that fantasy but keeps undermining it. Yes, there are multiple women in Ben's orbit who could be viable partners. Yes, the chemistry is there with more than one of them. But the series is really honest about how little time he has for real emotional intimacy while he's in constant survival and crisis mode. There's a painfully accurate thread where one potential love interest actually calls him out on this. She tells him, "I don't want to be another item on your to-do list of good deeds." He tries to reassure her, but the show doesn't let him off the hook. We see him cancel dates for missions, show up physically but be mentally glued to his phone's notifications, use "I'm just trying to help people" as a get-out-of-jail-free card when she's hurt. It's uncomfortable. Because we are conditioned to see heroism as this all-purpose justification, and here's someone saying, "Okay, but you don't get to ignore me and then act like I'm selfish for wanting your attention." That's a dynamic I don't see explored enough in these kinds of stories. On a more purely technical note, the direction of emotional close-ups is remarkably restrained. Indonesian dramas, like any national industry, have their own set of clichés: tearful monologues, shaking cameras in arguments, slow zooms from across the room. This show uses some of those tools, for sure, but often it pulls back when you expect it to go bigger. There are key confrontations where the camera actually stays a little further away, giving us their full bodies, their fidgeting hands, their weight shifts. It feels less like someone yelling in your face and more like you're across the room, uncomfortably eavesdropping. That distance works especially well in scenes between Ben and his ex. It visually underlines the gulf between who they were and who they've become. We haven't talked enough about his mom, and that's a crime, because she's low-key the moral spine of the whole thing. She's not the saintly suffering mother trope. She gets cranky, she worries about money, she nags him about marriage. But she also has this deeply internalized sense of fairness that he absorbs without even realizing. There's a bittersweet scene where she finds out, not exactly what the system is, but that he's been getting bonus money for helping women specifically. Her first reaction isn't, "How do we get more?" It's, "And the men you help? The older people? The kids? Don't they count?" She doesn't understand the mechanics, but instinctively, she senses the imbalance. Her influence shows up in smaller moments, too. Whenever Ben starts framing his success purely in terms of proving his ex wrong, she cuts through that noise with almost brutal pragmatism. "If you are working this hard just to show off," she says at one point, "you'll always be tired, no matter how much you earn." Coming from anyone else, it might sound like a fortune cookie line. Coming from a woman whose whole life has been about chasing enough money for rent and groceries and school fees, it lands like a verdict. You can see him recalibrate, even if only slightly, every time she drops one of those quiet grenades into the conversation. There's a scene late-ish in the story, no major spoilers, where everything is kind of falling apart for him. Business pressures, system glitches, personal relationships strained. He ends up back in his childhood home, exhausted, half-sick, the way grown kids do when the world is too loud. Mom makes him something simple to eat, not the dramatic soup of cinematic healing, just leftover rice fried with whatever's in the fridge. The lighting is this warm, uneven kitchen glow. He starts ranting about fate, about being used, about how maybe he should have just stayed a courier and minded his business. She listens for a while, then, without any music swell or fancy shot, she says, "You think you are the only one who ever felt used by life." And she starts listing, quietly, times when neighbors took advantage of her kindness, when family borrowed money and never paid it back, when she gave up opportunities so he could have better ones. "No one gave me a reward," she says. "No system. No magic. Only a son who turned out kind enough to still complain to me about doing good." And then she kind of laughs at herself and goes, "That's enough gift for me." It's corny, maybe, on paper. On screen, it gutted me. Because it reframes the whole system thing as just a flashy metaphor for what so many women do invisibly their whole lives: give, 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 with no pop-up saying, "Mission complete." And this is where the show's title really starts to feel layered. Diputus Hari, Bangkit Besok, dump today, rise tomorrow. It's not just about romantic heartbreak. It's about all the small cuts life gives you. All the ways you get dumped by institutions, employers, even by your own expectations. Bangkit Besok, the rising tomorrow, isn't a one-time montage. It's choosing, over and over, to keep getting up, even when the rewards are delayed or uneven or feel distributed by some glitchy, unfair system no one explained to you. Visually, the motif of rising gets a lot of play in staircases and elevators, obviously, but also in more subtle blocking. Ben is often framed on lower ground, looking up at higher floors, elevated highways, fancy balconies. As the series progresses, we see more shots from his point of view looking down, on streets, on crowds, on meetings in progress. But the very best shots are the ones that flatten that hierarchy again, like when he's back on a street corner, eating with his old courier friends, or when he's sitting on the warehouse floor helping pack boxes. The director seems very aware that the fantasy of rising can warp your sense of solidarity if you are not careful, so the camera keeps gently dragging him back down to street level, literally and figuratively. I know I've been pretty glowing so far, so let me hit a real criticism that stuck with me. There are stretches, especially just before the big crisis I mentioned, where the show leans too hard into business speak and loses some heart. We get one too many strategy scenes with whiteboards and revenue charts and we have to capture this market segment type dialogue. I understand the intent, they want to show he's putting in real work, not just coasting on magical missions, but the writing in those parts is flatter, more generic, and the actors visibly have less to sink their teeth into. You can almost feel the energy dip whenever we step into a conference room without any of his personal relationships tethered to the stakes. That said, even in those weaker patches, there are little character beats that make it worth sitting through. A nervous junior employee scribbling notes way too fast, a casual sexist remark that triggers the system in the background even though Ben doesn't act on it, a moment where he zones out during a pitch because he sees, through the glass, a woman arguing with security downstairs and his instincts flare. It's almost like the show is aware that boardroom drama isn't its strongest suit, so it keeps letting the outside world bleed in around the edges. As we push into the later third, the pacing gets more uneven but also more emotionally dense. You can feel the writers trying to juggle a lot, the mystery of the system's origins, which, to their credit, they never over-explain, the climax of his class conflict with the rich boyfriend, the fallout of his choices with the women he's hurt or helped, his fraught but loving relationship with his mom, and the overarching question of who he wants to be when the missions eventually stop coming. That's a lot of balls in the air. Not all of them land as smoothly as they could have, but the ambition of it. I respect the hell out of that. One choice I thought was weird at first but grew on me. There are brief, almost subliminal flashbacks to earlier missions intercut into later scenes where he's questioning himself. Like, he'll be in a dark hallway, about to open a door to a high-stakes meeting, and for 2 frames you see the frightened face of a girl he once helped in a similar hallway. Or he'll be celebrating a big milestone and the cutaway is not to fireworks or people cheering, but to that rainy night in the alley from his very first mission. It's disorienting if you are not paying attention, but thematically, it's the show reminding us, and him, that his life is layered, not linear. The past doesn't sit neatly behind him, it echoes into every present choice. And hanging over all of this, like a soft, persistent hum, is the fact that his ex is watching. Even when she's not in the room, you feel her presence in how he phrases things, in the way he flinches at certain compliments. There's a particular shot near the end of one episode where he's on stage receiving an award, crowd clapping, flashes going off. The camera pulls back, through the audience, out a side door, into the hallway, and down to where she's standing alone, watching the live feed on a screen. No dialogue. Just her face, this unreadable mix of pride, regret, defensiveness, maybe even a bit of awe. And then she turns the screen off. It's such a quiet, grown-up way of depicting unresolved feelings. No one storms in. No dramatic objection. Just a woman, in a hallway, processing the fact that the boy she once left because she didn't believe in his future now has a future so bright it hurts to look at directly. And that's where the drama does something that might frustrate anyone hungry for simple karmic symmetry. It doesn't punish her for that. It doesn't humiliate her publicly or force her into some groveling apology scene. It lets her live with the consequences in private moments like that one. Honestly, that felt more realistic and more brutal than any shouted confrontation could have been. The last few episodes start to orbit a handful of central questions with increasing intensity. What happens to a man whose entire identity is built around being useful when people stop needing him in the same way? What happens when the women he once helped outgrow him or move on or simply don't center him in their narratives anymore? And what happens when the system that once told him exactly who to be and what to do goes quiet, or worse, gives contradictory commands that no longer line up with his own moral compass? And that's where I'm going to leave this segment of the breakdown, because the way the show starts steering those questions toward its final stretch deserves its own deep dive. In the back stretch, the show almost strips away the comfort blanket of its own premise. Those questions about usefulness and identity stop being hypothetical and start getting baked into every choice Ben has to make. Up to this point, even at his lowest, there's been a safety net, a glowing notification, a mission description, a reward dangling at the end. He could tell himself, "I'm doing the right thing, the system says so." Then, as his business stabilizes and the initial adrenaline of his revenge and redemption wears off, the missions start coming in slower. Less urgent. More ambiguous. Sometimes they contradict his own instincts. Sometimes there's nothing at all. Just silence where the chime used to be. The first time the system goes quiet during a genuinely awful situation is when it really hits. He's in a taxi on the way to sign a major contract that would pull his company out of a financial nosedive. Outside, through the rain-streaked window, he sees a woman on the side of the road struggling with a flat tire, clearly distressed. Early series Ben? He'd stop before the system even had a chance to blink, consequences be damned. Mid-series Ben? He'd wait for the mission ping and then use that as his moral permission slip. Late series Ben stares at his silent phone, at the woman, then back at his reflection in the taxi window. No notification. No arrow telling him, "Go here." Just him, the ticking digital clock on the dashboard, and the knowledge that if he's late, his entire team might not get paid next month. The taxi's wipers swipe back and forth. That's all you hear for a second, rubber against glass, rain smearing the world into streaks. It's such a mundane sound for such a gigantic moment. He tells the driver to pull over. Not quickly, not heroically. Like he's dragging the word "stop" out of his own throat. And the system stays quiet. He gets out anyway. Helps her change the tire, hands numb, white shirt soaking through. She thanks him in this breathless, embarrassed way, like she wasn't sure anyone was going to bother. No glow. No mission complete. No gift card or skill unlock or whatever. Just the faint smell of wet asphalt, her relief, and his driver lurking anxiously in the background watching the meter run. When he gets back in the taxi, he's late. He knows it. You can see the panic starting to rise, the "what have I done" spiral gearing up. And then, just as he's about to curse himself for not treating life like a spreadsheet, the system finally pings. No mission log, no breakdown of points. Just a small line of text, "Independent good deed detected." No reward. It's almost cruel, right? But that tiny acknowledgement, that almost mocking, "I saw that," does something important. It tells him, and us, that the system was never supposed to be a leash. It was a crutch. And now it's time to walk. That moment, more than any glossy business montage or revenge beat, is where the show quietly levels up. Because suddenly every act of kindness is much scarier. Now when he helps, he can't hide behind, "Well, at least I'll get something out of it." Now the sacrifice is real. And if he doesn't help, he can't pretend he didn't see the notification. It's on him. No more cosmic babysitter. You start to realize that the system has been training him not just in skills or money management, but in making hard calls without applause. Of course, losing that external validation also makes him vulnerable in a new way. If he's not the chosen guy anymore, if missions can come to anyone or nowhere, then what is he? Just another businessman with a savior complex? The show leans into that anxiety by letting outside forces smell blood. This is where the rich boyfriend, who up to now has mostly been smirking from the sidelines, decides it's time to move beyond passive condescension and into active competition. He sees Ben's company as a threat now, not just some scrappy underdog he can laugh off over cocktails. The campaign against Ben isn't some cartoonish villain plan, it's reputational warfare. Rumors about his business practices, whispers that he manipulates vulnerable women to build his network, carefully timed leaks of old photos taken out of context. It's also painfully plausible in the age of social media that you might as well feel your own stomach clench. And here's the nasty part, the rumors are twisted versions of the truth. He does have an unusual number of women vouching for him. He does have a history with this ex and her new boyfriend. He does run a company that benefited from connections forged through those missions. There's just enough there to make everything look ugly if you tilt it a certain way. This is where the ex becomes really fascinating. Because she's stuck at the intersection of those narratives. She's the one person who knows both of them intimately enough to see the gears turning. There are scenes where she's in rooms where his name is being dragged through the mud, where people are gleefully gossiping about this fake hero who built his empire on playing knight in shining armor. Sometimes she laughs along, and you can see the self-protective layer. If she admits how unfair it is, she'd also have to admit she was wrong to judge him. Other times, you watch her go quiet, that tiny furrow appear between her brows when someone crosses a line. She's not innocent here, but she's also not comfortable with how cruel the game is getting. And then the push finally comes to shove, some kind of official investigation or public hearing into his company's practices. The exact mechanics vary depending on how you imagine it, a regulatory board, a lawsuit, a PR crisis spiraling into something more formal. But the important part is that for the first time, his ability to keep doing what he's doing is going to be decided in a room where truth and story are wrestling for dominance. Far more dangerous than any physical fight we've seen him in. He can't punch his way out of this one. He can't even really rely on the system, because help this woman doesn't map neatly onto defend yourself in a morally messy gray area. The build-up to that hearing is some of the tensest television in the drama. We see snippets of talking heads debating his case on TV, hashtags swinging from support to skepticism, his mom watching in the background with this tight, anxious mouth. We see him in his office late at night, screens glowing, legal documents spread out, the system quietly dormant in the corner of his vision like a ghost that's chosen to sit this one out. His team is freaking out. Some want to cut ties, to protect themselves. Others are stubbornly loyal but scared. He's trying to be the calm center of the storm, but you can see his hands shake when he pours coffee. And then we get that climactic scene the whole series has been seeding in pieces, the moment when the people he once helped decide whether they're going to stand up for him or disappear to save their own skin. The way the drama stages it is honestly kind of brilliant. The hearing room is bland and beige, fluorescent lights buzzing, plastic chairs squeaking. It's not some majestic courtroom with wood paneling. It's the kind of municipal space you've probably sat in for a boring meeting. Ben is called in, sits at this metal table. There's a panel of stern-faced officials or journalists or donors, whatever the context, they're clearly in judgment mode. Across the aisle, you see the rich boyfriend's representative. And in the back? At first, the seats are mostly empty. They start grilling him. Questions about conflict of interest. About why his client list is skewed the way it is. About the blurred line between charity and marketing. They pull up selective security footage of him arriving in the nick of time to help some woman, framed to look like a staged photo op. They read anonymous testimonies accusing him of enjoying the power imbalance a little too much. It's brutal. The sound mix in this scene is particularly sharp. The scratch of a pen, the tap of a water bottle cap, the click of someone's tongue. Nothing dramatic, just the tiny, everyday sounds that suddenly feel unbearably loud when you're on the spot. And he doesn't have a clean defense. How could he? He did benefit from all this. He did build something off those moments of crisis. He admits as much. The actor plays it with this combination of shame and defiance that's really compelling. He says, in essence, yes, I got things out of helping people. But I didn't start doing it for that, and I didn't stop doing it when the rewards went away. It's a messy truth, and it doesn't fit the tidy boxes the panel wants. Then the door in the back opens. At first it's just one person. The single mom from earlier, still in her work uniform, hair hastily tied back, clutching some crumpled papers. She looks lost, like she wandered into the wrong room. The clerk at the door tries to shoo her away, but she stands her ground, voice small but steady. I'm here to speak on his behalf. They tell her she's not on the schedule. She says she can wait. The hearing proceeds. A few questions later, the door opens again. The street vendor steps in, carrying a tray she's clearly brought straight from her stall, covered in cloth because she didn't even have time to pack it properly. Then the lawyer. The college student in office clothes now, a batch of carefully prepared documents in a cheap folder. The influencer, sunglasses off, face bare, not hiding behind filters. One by one, they fill the back rows. No swelling violence, no dramatic slow motion at first. Just the shuffle of their feet, the squeak of chairs as they sit. The panel notices. The rich boyfriend's rep notices. Ben definitely notices. His whole body language changes, he straightens, then seems to almost fold in on himself, overwhelmed. This is where the show gives in, a little, to the emotional payoff it's been carefully hoarding. They start calling on these people, reluctantly at first, and the testimonies start to pile up. Not all glowing. Some are bluntly honest in a way that makes Ben wince. The single mom says, I didn't even like him at first. I thought he was doing it for attention. The lawyer admits she found him patronizing until he learned to back off. The influencer owns up to using the situation to boost her brand. But each of them, in their own way, lands on the same bottom line. He showed up when no one else did, and he kept showing up. He followed through. He answered phone calls at stupid hours. He never asked for anything from them personally. One detail that really stuck with me, the street vendor, who earlier in the show was so self-conscious about sounding uneducated, comes in with bullet points scribbled on a school notebook, her kids' cartoon stickers still on the cover. Her hands shake so badly the paper rattles against the microphone. She stumbles over a couple of words, laughs nervously at herself, then says, I don't know how all this works. I just know that if you take his work away, people like me lose more than he does. That line hits like a hammer wrapped in cotton. Because it reframes everything the panel thought they were doing. This isn't just about one man's reputation. It's about the network that's grown around him, the invisible infrastructure of care that his company, and, yeah, the system, helped nurture. There's a shot midway through this sequence that knocked me sideways. The camera pulls back and up, giving us this almost overhead view of the room. On one side, the panel, neat and orderly. On the other, the messy cluster of people who have come because their lives intersected with his at their worst. It looks almost like a scale, with human beings instead of metal weights. You can feel the tilt, slowly, inevitably, shifting. Not because any one person gives a perfect, tear-jerking speech, but because the cumulative effect of all these flawed voices is undeniable. Even the ex, sitting off to the side, can't pretend she's not moved. There's a blink and you miss it moment where her eyes fill, and she bites the inside of her cheek to keep herself together. Does this instantly fix everything for Ben? No. And I love the show for that. His reputation doesn't come out spotless. The hearing doesn't end with a standing ovation and confetti. The panel is still skeptical about aspects of his operation. The rich boyfriend still has hooks in parts of the market and in public opinion. But the tide turns just enough that he's not sunk. And more importantly, for him and for us, this is the first time he's truly confronted with the idea that his worth is not measured in pop-up notifications or even revenue charts, but in the messy, sometimes inconvenient loyalty of human beings whose names don't fit neatly on any spreadsheet. Watching that, I had this weirdly personal reaction. It hit that part of my brain that remembers being bailed out by people I'd helped absent-mindedly years before, texts from acquaintances who turned out to be lifelines. That panic of, do I deserve this, mixed with, how do I ever repay you? The show seemed to be saying, you don't. You can't. That's the point. Community runs on something we don't have a proper currency for, no matter how many systems you build. After that public gut punch, the dynamic between Ben and his ex shifts in a way that finally feels genuinely adult. Up to now, so much of their energy has been about answered apologies and weaponized history. But seeing him defended by this motley crew of women forces her to realize something she's been resisting. Whatever story she's been telling herself about that cafe breakup, about his potential, about her own practical choice, it's incomplete. She thought she traded in a struggling dreamer for a sure thing. Turns out, she traded in a guy whose quiet influence rippled out farther than she could see. What I appreciate is that the show doesn't suddenly turn her into an ally. Growth doesn't mean she flips sides overnight. Instead, we get these awkward, brittle, strangely tender mini encounters. Maybe she drops off some documents at his office under the guise of professional necessity, and they end up standing by the same window, looking down at his couriers loading up bikes. For once, they're not jabbing at each other. They're just watching. She says, huff to herself, I didn't know it would look like this. He doesn't say, you should have believed in me. He just nods. There's grief there on both sides for the version of their lives that will never exist, and the show actually lets us sit with that grief without rushing to replace it with a new couple-shaped band-aid. If you came in expecting a big, sweeping second-chance romance, this might all feel frustrating. Where's the confession? Where's the rain-soaked airport scene? But for me, the lack of a neat bow between them is exactly what elevates the drama. Some rifts stay rifts. Some people are important not because they're endgame, but because they were the catalyst that hurled you into the trajectory you are on. The title promised, dump today, rise tomorrow, not dump today, married tomorrow. The show honors that difference. Now, let's talk about the system's origin, because I know that's the low itch a lot of viewers are desperate to scratch. Do we ever find out what it really is, who's behind it, why it chose him, why women specifically? The answer will either delight or infuriate you, depending on your taste. We get hints, patterns, maybe a face or a phrase that suggests something is pulling the strings, but we never get a big exposition dump that spells out the metaphysics. Personally, I loved this choice. I've read enough comments from people grumbling, but what about the backstory, to know I'm in the minority here, so let me make the case. Once you concretify the system, turn it into a lab experiment or an angel or an AI project gone rogue, you shrink it. You cage it inside genre expectations. Suddenly we are arguing about plot holes and power levels instead of sitting with the real questions the show is asking. What do we owe each other? How do we live with the knowledge that our kindness is unevenly rewarded, if at all? Is it still kindness if we are low-key keeping score, even subconsciously? By keeping the system slightly opaque, almost more like an allegory than a gadget, the drama keeps our focus where it belongs, on the choices, not the circuitry. There is, however, one late-game reveal about how the system selects its missions that I think is fair to highlight, because it ties the whole women in trouble angle into something bigger. We learn, not through a monologue, but through Ben piecing together data, that the missions were never about women as a category. They were about women whose lives intersected with specific fault lines in the city, areas of weak infrastructure, unreliable institutions, patterns of violence or neglect. The system wasn't saying, women need saving. It was saying, here is where the fabric is thinnest, and where the people falling through it are most often female. That's a subtle but crucial distinction. The target isn't their gender, it's the cracks in the world. Once Ben understands that, it changes how he reacts to the missions that remain. He stops seeing them as quests and more as data points in a larger map of what's broken. That's when his business evolution genuinely aligns with the ethical growth we've been craving. Instead of just building a bigger company, he starts quietly building in supports inspired by that map, partnerships with shelters, training for his riders on harassment and de-escalation, donation channels baked into his services. The system's ping becomes less of a siren and more of a subtle nudge. Remember why you started. What about the rich boyfriend? Does he get a dramatic, humiliating downfall? Partial spoilers, but keeping it general, he doesn't walk away unscathed. His own shortcuts and ethical blind spots catch up to him, not because Ben set some mastermind trap, but because eventually you can't keep building on sand. Deals collapse. People he's underpaid and overworked start talking. The ex has to reckon with that, too, because while she didn't commit his sins, she benefited from his lifestyle. The show sneaks in this very pointed idea. Just like Ben's good deeds created ripples that eventually came back to save him, the rich boyfriend's selfishness leaves a wake that others have to swim through. Consequences don't care if you personally got your hands dirty. Living in a system, you're always entangled. There's a scene, quite, almost too quiet, where he and Ben finally have it out, not in a brawl, not in a dramatic office coup, but in a nearly empty bar, long after whatever big public reckonings have shaken out. No cameras. No audience. Just two men who made different sets of choices staring at each other over cheap beer that neither of them really wants. The boyfriend tries to bait him, at first, tosses out lines about getting lucky and riding sympathy. Ben's older now, not in years but in miles. He lets it slide. Then the guy says something that hits too close to home about the ex, about how she always had expensive taste, and Ben finally snaps, not into violence, but into honesty. He basically says, "You think you're the only one who ever worked hard? You think money is the only way to prove you matter?" It's not a polished speech. He stumbles, gets angry, backs off, comes back at it from another angle. But the core of it is simple. He refuses to define success as the number in your account or the brand of your watch. Coming from anyone else, it might sound sanctimonious. Coming from a guy who we've watched battle his way up from counting coins in his palm to signing contracts with the kind of people who once sneered at him, it lands different. The rich boyfriend doesn't crumble, doesn't sob into his drink. He scoffs, finishes his glass, and walks away. The camera doesn't follow him. Because the show isn't actually interested in his inner life beyond what it reflects about our protagonist. That center of gravity has always been Ben's moral weather, not the side character's redemption. It's one of those moments where you realize the story is choosing not to give us the satisfaction of seeing every arrogant person broken. Sometimes they just keep living, with reduced circumstances and bruised ego, and that's its own kind of sentence. Late game, the visuals settle into this interesting blend of his two worlds. The cinematic language of poverty and the cinematic language of success start to overlap. There's this rooftop scene at dusk where he's standing with a few of his riders, women and men, overlooking the city. In any other show, this would be framed as a conqueror surveying his territory. Here, the camera goes soft focus on the high rises and lingers instead on things like laundry lines between buildings, kids playing football in a narrow alley, a street vendor lighting her stove. Ben points out areas he knows are still hot zones in the system's mental map. He's not plotting expansion, he's thinking out loud about what still needs fixing. The soundtrack under that scene is not triumphant. It's this low, hopeful but haunted instrumental, with a little motive from the system's chime woven into the melody so subtly you might miss it if you're not listening for it. That's the show's way of telling us, the system isn't gone. It's changed shape. It lives in his habits now, in the culture of his company, in the kids who will grow up seeing this as normal and deciding where to take it next. I want to highlight the performances in this final stretch because everyone brings a kind of tired clarity that's really satisfying. The actor playing Ben sheds a lot of the wide-eyed reactive energy he had at the start. His late series face has lines it didn't before, not literal deep wrinkles, but a certain tightness around the eyes, a different way his jaw sets when he's making a decision. His smile is rarer and softer, like it's earned instead of reflexive. Even his posture changes. Early on, he's always slightly hunched, as if bracing for impact. Later, he stands straighter, not in a "I'm the boss" way, but like a man who's finally comfortable occupying space without apology. The actress playing the ex gets to do some incredibly nuanced work. She has fewer big, explosive scenes and more moments where the camera just watches her react as life refuses to conform to her plans. There's a quietly brave bit where she walks back through a neighborhood she once lived in, now in clothes that scream upwardly mobile, and you see her physically shrink. A group of kids bumps into her, barely apologizing, and she laughs it off, but her eyes do that glassy, unfocused thing people get when they're remembering too much. She sits at a roadside stall, orders something cheap she hasn't eaten in years, and for a good long beat, the show lets her just sit there, tasting it, feeling everything she traded. Crucially, they don't then have Ben wander by and turn it into some meet-cute callback. That moment belongs to her alone. And that, to me, is one of the reasons this drama feels more generous than many of its peers. It allows even the so-called antagonist some private humanity outside of how she impacts the hero. You might still be mad at her choices. You might never fully forgive her. But you can't deny she's a fully fleshed person, not a walking moral lesson. The women in his network each get tiny, satisfying closures too, not entire episodes, but crumbs that show where their lives are headed beyond being the girl from episode 3 or the mom from episode 5. The student, now fully in the workforce, pushes back against office sexism using the same blunt courage she once used to drag Ben out of his martyr tendencies. The lawyer wins a case that's thematically similar to an early mission, and we see her celebrating with colleagues, not with him, because her victories aren't his trophies. The single mom is training a new batch of riders, as comfortable giving orders as she once was receiving help. These little flashes are the show's way of saying, his story is not their centerpiece. It intersected with theirs for a while, then spun off. That's how real life works. So where does that leave the system by the time the credits are ready to roll? We don't get a tidy shutdown scene with some dramatic "mission over" banner. Instead, we get a gradual fading of its visibility. Missions are rare and subtle, often aligning with things Ben was already involved in. The chime becomes less about emergency and more about gentle calibration. There's even an implication, in a late montage, that it's begin to notice other people, quick flashes of faint UI outlines around strangers stepping in to help someone. The show never confirms whether they're seeing it, or if it's just a visual metaphor, but the suggestion is clear. This was never about turning one man into a superpowered savior. It was about nudging a whole ecosystem into slightly better habits. And then, because the drama can't resist one last jab at our expectations, there's a moment in the final stretch where Ben, exhausted after a long day of entirely mundane work, logistics, payroll, arguing with a contractor, collapses onto his bed and, out of old habit, says out loud, "Any missions today?" The room is silent. He laughs at himself, this half-bitter, half-fond sound, and mutters, "Thought so." Then, just as the scene is about to cut, his phone buzzes. No fanfare. Just a normal text. It's from one of the women he'd helped long ago, now a friend in her own right, sending a photo of some small victory, a new shop sign, a child's graduation, something simple. He opens it, smiles, types back. No overlay. No reward notification. But emotionally, we understand, this is the real loop now. This is the feedback. Human to human, not interface to user. That's the kind of thing that could feel corny if the show hadn't earned it over so many hours of moral wrestling. For me, it worked. It landed like a quiet, "Okay. We are done here. The training wheels are off." There are viewers who are going to watch all that and still wish we'd gotten more sci-fi. More answers. A villain behind the curtain. I get that impulse. There's a certain satisfaction in closing the box neatly. But when I sat there as the last episode wound down, what stayed with me weren't questions about where the code came from. It was the image of that drab hearing room full of people who bothered to show up for someone because, once upon a time, he bothered to show up for them. It was his mom's tiny kitchen, the oil popping in the pan, her offhand philosophy about doing good without ever seeing a single notification. It was the ex alone in the hallway, thumb hovering over the off button on the live stream of his award. Those are the frames looping in my head, not some glowing data center. If I step back and look at Diputus Hari and Bangkit Besok as a whole, it's messy. Deliberately, stubbornly messy. Structurally, the mission of the week format early on butts up against the heavier serialized arcs at the end and creates some pacing whiplash. The business jargon scenes drag. The system rules wobble inconsistency sometimes. There are a few missions where you go, wait, why did that qualify but this didn't? You can feel multiple writers' room debates bleeding through in different episodes about how hard to lean into the fantasy versus the realism. But for me, the mess is part of the appeal. Heartbreak is messy. Class mobility is messy. Trying to be a good man in a world that likes you better when you're either fully predatory or completely self-effacing. Messiest of all. The show doesn't resolve every contradiction it raises. It leaves some threads loose. What happens to Ben 10 years down the line? Does he burn out? Does the company grow beyond his control? Does he someday meet someone who can actually meet him where he is, in all his confusing mix of altruism and ego? We don't know. We are not meant to. The story is about the arc from rock bottom humiliation to a kind of grounded, flinchy maturity. Everything past that is another drama. On a craft level, I keep thinking about how intentionally the visuals evolve. That shift from cramped, neon-soaked alleys to wider, warmer frames could have been an easy, cheesy shorthand for success. But the fact that they keep puncturing the gloss with those cutaways to the old haunts, him waiting at a roadside stall for a late-night snack, still in his nice shirt but sitting on a plastic stool, him stuck in traffic behind a swarm of couriers that remind him of his former self, makes the rise feel less like escape and more like expansion. He's not leaving his past behind, he's dragging it with him, whether he likes it or not. The sound design, too, pulls more weight than you'd expect in a melodrama. The system's chime evolving, the way crowd noise swells or recedes depending on whether he feels connected or isolated, the subtle use of diegetic music, songs playing from shop radios or someone's headphones, that comment ironically on what's happening without winking too hard. There's one scene where he's walking through a mall, suit on, new watch glinting, clearly out of his comfort zone, and in the background, a store is playing a cheesy breakup pop song about, "You'll regret losing me." It's such a on-the-nose choice, but they let it be background, not foreground. He doesn't comment on it. We just hear it and smirk a little, then feel slightly sad because we know that's been his internal soundtrack this whole time. Performance-wise, watching the actor playing Ben navigate the different modes of this character over the series is like watching someone try on different skins and slowly settle into the one that fits. He's got bewildered good guy down from the start. Where he impressed me was later, when he had to embody someone who's learned to play the game, who can be strategic without losing his core softness. There's a late scene where he's in negotiation with a hard-nosed client, and for a minute, he sounds almost ruthless. You hear his friends and mom's voices in the back of your mind going, when did he learn to talk like that? Then, when he steps out of the room and is alone, his shoulders sag, and he whispers, "That felt gross." That crack between how he has to act and who he feels like he is? He walks that line really well. The supporting cast sells the world. No one feels like they exist purely to deliver exposition. Even minor characters, a nosy neighbor, a snarky barista, a traffic cop, get little flickers of life that make the city feel like a real organism rather than just a background for Ben's hero's journey. That matters because a lot of the moral weight of the story hinges on whether you believe this is a community worth fighting for. If everyone else came off as cardboard, his crusade would feel hollow. Instead, by the time we get to the end, you recognize faces in the crowd at that hearing scene the way you'd recognize neighbors in a real crisis. There are, of course, some missteps. Not every attempt to tackle a serious social issue lands with equal nuance. A subplot involving online harassment, for example, flirts with the old, just ignore the haters, advice before course correcting, and those episodes left me wishing they'd consulted more closely with people who live in those trenches. A late twist around one woman's hidden connection to Ben's past feels melodramatic in a way the rest of the show mostly avoids. You can see the string being pulled. And every now and then, the script leans too far into sermon mode, having characters say the theme out loud instead of trusting the visuals and situations. But if the question is, did I feel something honest watching this? Absolutely. There were scenes where I caught myself holding my breath, not because I didn't know, intellectually, that the hero arc would probably bend toward redemption, but because the specific flavor of compromising with your own ideals they were playing with felt uncomfortably close to choices I've seen people around me make. Do you take the investor's money even if it means diluting your mission? Do you confront a client's casual misogyny knowing it might cost your team work? Do you ghost a friend who's draining you, even if they were there when no one else was? The show doesn't answer those dilemmas with neat, right answers. It lets us watch someone fumble, course correct, and sometimes make the wrong call for the right reason or the right call for the wrong reason. One thing I didn't expect going in, based on that very pulpy logline, was how much the show would end up meaningfully centering women's voices in its story. Beyond just being damsels with conveniently timed problems. The mission structure could have easily reduced them to checkboxes, saved 1, plus 10 points. Instead, the writing keeps circling back to their interiority, their agency, and their ongoing arcs. Even in that big hearing scene, the emotional crescendo isn't Ben delivering a monologue, it's the chorus of women whose stories refuse to be flattened into props for or against him. And yes, there's an irony there, a show about a man who gets supercharged for helping women still risks making itself about him. But the final does some careful work to decenter him just enough. We leave some characters in mid-conversation far from his orbit. We see networks forming that don't require him as a hub. It's not a perfect balance, but it's more self-aware than I expected from a premise that could have been a straight male wish fulfillment ride. So, where do I land on Diputus Hari Bangkit Besok overall? I really, genuinely liked it. Maybe even loved it, not with the blind swoon of, it can do no wrong, but with the kind of warm frustration you feel towards something that swung hard at big themes and occasionally whiffed, but never stopped trying to be about more than its own hook. It starts as a revenge fantasy with a sci-fi twist and gradually reveals itself as a story about growing up, about recalibrating what success means when you are no longer playing only for your own ego but for the people who have hitched their wagon to yours. If you are a newcomer to this type of drama, this is actually a pretty forgiving entry point. The system mechanics are straightforward enough not to scare off people who don't live in web novel land, and the emotional stakes are grounded in situations that will be very familiar if you've ever worried about rent, parents, or the gap between your dreams and your bank account. You don't need to be a genre nerd to appreciate what it's doing. In fact, if you come in with fewer expectations about how a system story is supposed to go, you might enjoy the way it plays around on the edges. If you are more of a critic-minded viewer, there's a lot to chew on. The way masculinity is framed, the ethics of altruism when rewards are involved, the portrayal of class aspiration and class shame, the varied ways women navigate vulnerability in public spaces, all of that gives you material for essays if that's your thing. You'll probably also be more annoyed by the uneven pacing and the occasional heavy-handed line. But personally, I'd rather watch a show that overreaches and stumbles than one that plays it safe all the way through. Who should probably skip this? If you have zero tolerance for any sort of magical or game-like conceit in your dramas, if the sight of a glowing HUD makes you roll your eyes so hard you see your brain, this might not be for you, no matter how grounded the rest of it is. Also, if you are expecting tightly plotted corporate intrigue with airtight legal logic and high-octane strategy scenes, you are going to find the business side of this show a bit soft focus. It's more interested in how those decisions feel than in showing you the full, realistic workflow of starting a company. But if you can handle a little genre seasoning with your social realism, and if you are willing to sit through a few wobbly exposition dumps early on, what you get in return is a surprisingly thoughtful, occasionally funny, often tender take on the oldest story in the book. Boy loses girl, boy thinks success will fix the hole she left, boy finds out that the only thing that really fills it is becoming a person he can live with when the phone is off and the room is quiet. On a purely emotional level, the show gave me a handful of moments I'll be thinking about for a while. Ben sitting on the elevator floor, choosing memory over mission, his mom stirring leftover rice, tossing philosophy into the pan like salt, that tired, worn hearing room slowly filling with people who should have been too busy to show up and came anyway. Those images lodged somewhere under my ribs. They made me a little softer toward my own pettiness, my own scorekeeping instincts, and a little more aware of all the invisible systems of care that keep people around me afloat. If you've watched it already, I'm really curious where you landed on the X, especially. Did you want a bigger punishment? A full redemption? Were you satisfied with the half-open, half-closed door the show leaves her with? Because that's one of those places where your own experiences with heartbreak and class anxiety are going to color the hell out of your reaction. I've seen some takes calling her irredeemable and others arguing she's the most realistic character in the whole thing. I kind of think both can be true. And if you haven't watched it yet but you've somehow sat through this entire breakdown, first of all, respect, second, I'd say give it a few episodes at least. Let the premise settle. Let Ben be a bit of a messy, slightly self-righteous idiot for a while, he grows out of it. Pay attention to the small faces, the ones you think you won't see again. They matter more than you think. And maybe, just maybe, keep an ear out for that little chime in your own life, not from some cosmic app, but in those moments when you have 12 reasons not to bother helping and one gut-deep reason to pull over anyway. This has been Jonota News, and I think I've talked your ear off enough about one Korea and his temperamental universe. If you like this kind of long, slightly too honest drama autopsy, feel free to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and tell me in the comments what show you want unraveled next. I'll see you in the next video.